Hi, everyone. My name is Kimia Carden, and I am a physical therapist at Sullivan Physical Therapy. We have Varian Hans with us today to talk about beating the Texas heat with herbs. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. So I'm very excited to be on here. It's been a while since we've had a webinar with Sullivan PT, but I'm really happy to be back and excited to be having a summer series with y'all.
We are thrilled to have you.
Thank you. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about how to stay cool in the summer heat with herbs and food. So if you'd like, I can go ahead and just share my screen. We can get started.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
And if anyone does have any questions, they can write them in the Q&A box and I can ask you throughout.
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we're going to get into it. Let me introduce myself. I'm Varian Hans. I'm a certified nutritional therapy practitioner. I work with clients in the Central Texas region, as well as virtually. So I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner. I'm also the founder of Varian Hans Nutrition. And today we're going to be covering a few different pillars to supporting your coolness, your temperature during the summer, because as we know, Texas can be quite brutal, and it's already gotten over 100 degrees and it's only May. So we're in for it this year.
I hear this is a record for Texas.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to be talking about cooling herbs, hydration, supportive minerals, how to assess your mineral status, and some recipes at the end. I do have to give a disclaimer. The information in today's webinar is not intended to be medical advice. So please double check with your practitioner before you make any changes to your diet or supplement regimen. Without further ado, these are our cooling herbs. According to Benjamin Zappin, who's a really wonderful herbalist, there's two different types of cooling herbs. We have what's called the refrigerants and the diaphoretics. Refrigerants actually help you cool from the inside out, while diaphoretics encourage sweating. And the refrigerants, they work by a couple of different mechanisms, but mainly they lower your body's internal temperature and help cool the actual tissues. They include lemongrass, chrysanthemum, lemon balm, lavender, spearmint, peppermint, and chamomile. If you also notice that a lot of these herbs, like the lemon balm, lavender, peppermint, and chamomile, are considered relatively calming on the nervous system, which is really nice during the summer because that heat is a stressor, especially if you're really active and you're out in the sun and maybe not drinking enough water. I mean, that heat is a bit of a stressor on the nervous system. So there's kind of a 2-for-1 benefit there with some of those refrigerant herbs. And the diaphoretics, they encourage perspiration or sweating, and they include the peppermint, lemon balm, catnip, elderflower, and chamomile. So there's a little bit of overlap, which is kind of nice. That doesn't mean that you have to go out of your way buying really exotic herbs. Most of these herbs can be purchased at any natural health food store, either in the bulk section or even just in tea bags. And so just keep in mind that tea bags, whenever you're buying herbed tea that's already pre-bagged like that, you just want to make sure that you read the box. A lot of tea bags these days are actually made with plastic. So if you're steeping your tea bags in hot water, you're exposing yourself to the different chemicals that can be released whenever plastic's exposed to heat. So I recommend buying these herbs in bulk, or just making sure that on the box it says that the bag itself is made with plant fiber. And if it doesn't say it on the box, go check out the website. Typically they'll let you know. They're pretty proud about it. You just have to do a little bit of digging sometimes. But yes, these are ones that you can keep on hand. You can drink them as iced teas, but we're going to talk about some recipes. But iced teas are a really great way to get those into your diet.
Where do you recommend buying those herbs in bulk?
Natural Grocers surprisingly has a lot of those in bulk.
Cool.
I'm sure trying to think, does Whole Foods even have that? Whole Foods has a wonderful herb section and their teas are really great quality, but I'm not too sure about their bulk, but I know that Natural Grocers is a great option.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So why do we want to sweat? Most of us know that sweating helps cool us down just by the process of evaporation. Whenever sweat pools on the skin, it evaporates because of the heat and it has a cooling effect on the body. But what's really interesting is that while we sweat, we actually lose some beneficial minerals like sodium. That's why it's good to replenish those. That's what we're going to talk a little bit about that towards the end. But we are able to excrete some really toxic metals. So things like arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury can be excreted in significant amounts through the skin. So it's good to sweat. So how do we support our internal temperature with food? In Chinese medicine, there's a theory that every food has a either warming or cooling effect, and some are considered neutral. And the idea to this is that we want to balance our internal ecosystem. So the key to optimum health is making sure that we are eating foods that help balance our internal temperature. So certain foods have that cooling effect, which we're going to list some of the main ones. But before we dive into that, it's kind of surprising, but it's actually not recommended to have really ice cold food on a regular basis in the summer or really any time of year in Chinese medicine. Icy foods tend to slow down digestion. And over time, when digestion gets a little sluggish, that can impact your energy levels just for one, energy levels, your blood sugar handling. So you can definitely have the ice cream, enjoy the popsicles, but maybe have that on the side and so not making that a full gigantic bowl of ice cream, or just pairing that with some of these other warming foods. So having something like cinnamon ice cream versus just something like vanilla or blueberry. So the cooling foods we're going to talk about today, they're going to be cucumber, watermelon, tomato, and corn. All of those have cooling benefits, at least energetically, but the first three are actually really high in water. So they count towards your overall daily water intake.
Would you say it's more beneficial to get your water intake from a mix of all these foods than obviously just drinking water throughout the day? Like, do we retain the water better by eating these foods that are filled with water?
It's actually a really good question. Yes, it's good to get a mix. There's a conversation of thought of what they call structured water. Structured water is just basically the same kind of water you would find in nature, where it wasn't sent through miles and miles of pipes to get to your tap. It's also, it hasn't been inundated with UV rays or gone through the process of like distillation for distilled water. And so structured water is basically just water in its whole form. And so you can find that naturally in fruit or vegetables. Anytime you can increase your intake with fruits and vegetables that are high in water, you're automatically increasing your structured water. So you don't have to go out of your way getting a really fancy water filter that helps mimic that. You can just do that by eating whole food forms that have a good amount of water in them. So, but yes, it's good to do that. And also the nice thing is that you're getting the added benefit of fiber that actually slows down the absorption of water in the gut. So it gives your body a little bit more time to process it instead of you just, chugging a glass of water and then running to the bathroom 20 minutes later.
Totally.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a little bit further about talking about hydration. Water is the most important nutrient of the body. And actually dehydration is considered the most common nutrient deficiency. So we can only go 8 weeks without food, but it's only days with water. So water is far more essential. Water makes up about 55 to 60% of our total overall body mass. And in the average adult, that's about 10 to 13 gallons of water. So we are water-filled beings, and we need to replenish that during the summer. And dehydration is incredibly common. Again, it's the most common nutrient deficiency that we see. And when the body's water content decreases just as little as 2%, you'll start to experience the sensation of thirst. But then at that point, fatigue can also increase. So it doesn't take much for you just to get tired from a little bit of dehydration. If we have a significant drop of up to 10%, you'll see that in some pretty dangerous health problems, digestive disorders, cardiovascular disease, immune system dysregulation, and musculoskeletal problems. And losses of greater than 10% can cause death. So water is really important.
And just to note on that, we also see a lot of dehydration contributing to increased urinary frequency with our patients as well, which is always interesting to note with them, because some patients think, oh, if I'm going a lot, I should stop drinking so much, right? But do you see that as well?
I do. So I see that a lot with people who their minerals are a little imbalanced. We'll talk a little bit here in a bit about electrolytes, and those are the minerals that are required to effectively uptake water into our cells. And if we're depleted of those electrolytes, then yes, they're going to have increased urinary frequency, and they're going to find themselves just not absorbing the water. They'll be drinking water all day long, but they still have hangnails,
Right,
you know. So you have to use those minerals. So yeah, I do see that as well. Some really common signs of dehydration, we have what they call the early signs and the more mature signs. The early signs are fatigue, anxiety, irritability, depression, cravings, cramps, and headaches. While the more mature signs are heartburn, joint pain, back pain, migraines, fibromyalgia, constipation, and colitis. So basically what that's saying is that dehydration can worsen any of those symptoms, and then sometimes can be one of the root causes of them. And I can tell you that I've seen that in my child. I have a 5-year-old, and whenever he's not drinking water and he's running around and sweating and playing, he is the most irritable little being you've ever met. And as soon as you give him a glass of water, he's like back to just himself again. It's like the 80s movie with the gremlins, you know, he's back to himself. So I think we kind of lose touch with our inner intuition, and sometimes we can go through days, weeks, months of chronic dehydration, and that's all worsening the symptoms that we have of the anxiety, the depression, you know, even cramps during our menstrual cycle.
Right, totally.
So mineral absorption, the body requires electrolytes for proper water absorption. Electrolytes have 4 general functions. The first one being that they actually control the osmosis of water intake, or water between fluid compartments. All that means is how our cells and our tissues absorb water. They help to maintain adequate pH balance. They carry an electrical current, and they serve as cofactors needed for optimal activity of enzymes. So these are not only just digestive enzymes, but these are the digestive enzymes are the enzymes that our digestive system produces to break down our food properly. But we also have a set of enzymes that are the catalyst for different enzymatic reactions, like producing hormones, or your liver going through phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. Enzyme just means it's a catalyst for change. And so minerals are dependent, or enzymes are dependent on the quality, the amount, and the ratio of these minerals. The main electrolytes that we see, granted there's quite a few of them, but the main ones are going to be the sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, calcium, and phosphorus. What's really interesting is that these minerals can become imbalanced when we are in seasons of stress. They can become imbalanced due to different sort of even supplementation, pharmaceuticals, lack of sleep. These minerals are the catalyst for so many different processes of the body, including adequate water absorption. So the key to preventing yourself from having to go to the restroom on a regular basis, if you're increasing your water intake, is to really focus on these electrolytes and bringing them back into homeostasis and balance. Something that I do tell my clients is that if you're drinking filtered water, to be sure to add a pinch of just regular Redmond's Real Salt, which is the salt that I recommend, versus Himalayan salt. Redmond's Real Salt you can find at H-E-B, but it's just a really wonderful quality salt, and it's very affordable. And you just add a pinch to your glass to help replenish the missing electrolytes from filtering that water. And it shouldn't taste salty, it's just a pinch.
So there are a ton of, I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but there's a ton of supplements out now. Like the first example that comes to mind is one that I personally have tried, Liquid IV. what do you think about those? So are those good quality supplements of those minerals?
It depends. So liquid IV in particular, actually a lot of these different electrolyte blends, whether they're little sticks or mixes you just add into your water or drops, most of them, their balance of electrolytes are just fine. I don't have any issue with those. The rest is going to be bio-individualized. Are you okay with consuming natural flavors that are on the label? Natural flavors can be kind of a gray area in the food manufacturing industry. It can be a lot of different compounds that may not be natural as you think. And sometimes they'll add stevia, and we're finding out that stevia can sometimes cause a glucose spike. It depends on how they extract it. If it's an actual really good quality stevia extraction, it's not going to spike your blood sugar. But if it's a kind of a crappy one, then it will. So for adding that into our water all day, that can kind of send you onto a glucose roller coaster. And so just my recommendation is just boiling back to the basics and adding a good quality salt like red mineral salt is a great way to avoid those additional additives, and you're just getting the minerals.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Now I have no problem with those. It just keep that in mind. And there's some other brands out there. There's one called Mineral Concentrates. It's called Concentrates, but it's a little blue bottle. You can get it after grocers. It's a liquid, and then you can just add that into your water. So non-flavored, it's just minerals. And some people really can't stand the flavor. It depends on the person. It depends on your palate and your tolerance. So I find just the regular salt being much more palatable for most people.
Okay. Good to know. And just a pinch of that salt, you said?
Just a pinch. You shouldn't taste it.
Right.
Yeah, it shouldn't be salty at all. You might have a little flavor in the background. You're like, that tastes different than it did before, but it shouldn't be salty.
Right.
Okay. So how do we assess our mineral status? Because everyone is so individualized, and we need to know where we're at. Because if we go back to these electrolytes, the first ones are sodium and potassium. Sodium and potassium are a really interesting duo. Minerals work in ratio. So if you take one mineral, so if you, let's just say if you're increasing your sodium content, that's automatically going to be influencing your potassium levels, your magnesium levels. Minerals do not work in isolation. So if we're doing any sort of supplementation or changes in diet to affect our mineral status, we have to remember that it is affecting a lot of other minerals. It just depends on which ones. So how do we kind of figure out where you're at? Because sodium and potassium in particular, all of our cells has what's called a sodium potassium pump. All that is really a doorway for nutrients and hormones to get inside of the cell and excess byproducts to go out. But if our sodium to potassium ratio is off, either it can be too high or too low, that affects actually our cell permeability. So that means that minerals, nutrients, hormones may not be able to get into the cells and byproducts out, or the cell is too permeable and everything is not staying where it should. So the nutrients aren't staying in long enough and the byproducts are just leaking out here and there. And so sodium and potassium is really influenced by stress. I see this all the time with my clients where sodium and potassium, the ratio can be a little on the low side if we are experiencing burnout. And that burnout can affect how our, excuse me, I was a little distracted with the cell phone ringing. So that ratio can be a little off. So I see this a lot in clients who have healthy lab work. On lab work, on paper, they look great. Their thyroid levels look fantastic, but they're experiencing the signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism. So if we do a hair tissue mineral analysis testing, what we can see is that their sodium potassium ratio is too low. So what that means is the thyroid hormone is not getting into the cell. So before we really start changing our mineral supplementation, taking electrolyte supplements on a regular basis throughout the day, on a weekly basis, we want to assess where we're at. Hair tissue mineral analysis is a really great way to do that. All it is that you actually send in a hair sample. And so as our hair grows, so we have our hair follicle. That follicle is exposed to the interstitial fluid of the body. And so that leaves an imprint of our mineral status. And you can actually send in a sample of your hair and it gives you an idea of what your mineral status has been like over the last 3 months. And so that gives us an idea of not only the individual minerals, like what you can see here in this picture, but also the ratios. So how is your sodium to potassium ratio? How are your cells doing? How's the cell permeability doing? And It tells us a lot more than just your mineral status. It can give us an idea of your heavy metal toxicity, your metabolic rate, your adrenal function, thyroid function, nervous system imbalances, protein synthesis, inflammation. I mean, the list goes on. This is a really wonderful way to get a baseline and get a peek under the hood of where you're at before you start diving into the world of mineral supplementation. But this is helpful, especially if you know that you've been in a season of stress and you're having a hard time retaining the water that you're drinking.
Totally. And it sounds like the same way your stress levels can influence the levels of minerals in your body and the concentrations, what you're putting in your body overall as well. So what you're intaking in the foods are also affect your stress levels in a way, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So just a little recap of everything we talked about today is that there's two different kinds of cooling herbs. We have our refrigerants and diaphoretics. The refrigerants are the ones that help actually cool your internal temperature, while the diaphoretics help produce perspiration or sweating. Certain foods have a cooling quality to them, but overdoing it with the icy foods is not a great idea as it impacts digestion. Staying hydrated is critical in the summer months to not only make sure that you're replenishing what you're sweating out, but also to help reduce the symptoms of fatigue, irritability, help support digestion, prevent constipation, all of those things. Minerals influence our water absorption and prevent excessive bathroom visits. So if you're one that finding yourself just running to the restroom, it's a good idea to maybe get evaluated or at least see what's going to work for you. HTMA is a wonderful way to do that.
Awesome. Is it possible to overdo it on the minerals?
Absolutely. So there's some out there. And so are you thinking of one in particular?
Just like, so we're talking about adding a pinch of salt to water, like overdoing it. So adding a pinch of salt to every glass of water, is that going to be an excess of sodium in the body?
It takes so for sodium in particular, it takes a long time for that to happen, unless you're someone with kidney issues, renal failure, hypertension. But we also have to remember, so our body utilizes sodium in a lot of different reactions. So anytime our body produces cortisol, that's going to be sodium dependent. So if you know yourself to not be getting good quality sleep, maybe you're waking up throughout the night because you have a kid or you have a very stressful job, anytime cortisol, your stress hormone is going to be produced, your body's utilizing sodium to do that. And there is some safety in the fact that if you use a good quality salt like Redmond's royal salt, because it's not just sodium, a really interesting experiment to do is get yourself some Redmond's royal salt and some regular white iodized table salt and do a taste test. And you'll find the Redmond's royal salt, it tastes almost sweet, especially in comparison. And because if you look at the mineral content, it's not just sodium, there's going to be trace minerals there as well. So if you're using a good quality, minimally processed salt like that, you're not just getting pure sodium chloride every single time you add that to your glass. But yes, some minerals can be overdone, particularly calcium, for example. Calcium supplementation needs to be really individualized because there's a lot of different vitamin components and mineral components to proper utilization of that calcium. So for example, we need to make sure we have vitamin D in place, vitamin K in place, and magnesium in place to make sure that you're actually absorbing that calcium effectively and putting it where it should go. And that's going to be in your bones versus your tissues, like in an arterial calcium deposit. So calcium supplementation needs to be done with your doctor. It needs to be done with keeping all of those different cofactors in mind. So that's something I'd be pretty wary of. But in regards to sodium, potassium, which are your two main electrolytes, you do have to be a little wary at times, especially with the potassium, but with the sodium in particular, it's going to be a little difficult to do that, especially if you're active. So it depends on the person, I guess. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that does. And the hair mineral analysis, like analyzes all of those minerals, including magnesium, phosphorus. Okay.
It does. Yeah. And so, but if you are just wanting to support overall hydration, starting with just that salt in the water is a very low risk way to start.
Yeah, that does make sense. And then as far as the foods with cooling qualities go, so you talked about how we obviously need to maintain homeostasis. So not overdoing it on the cooling foods as well, right? Like also mixing with, so what are, I guess, warmer foods that go well in conjunction with those cooler foods?
So the warming foods are going to be things like ginger, cinnamon, all of those warming spices in particular, even warm foods like soups and stews, things like that can help warm digestion. And it all depends on the person. I can just tell you from personal experience, it's taken me a few years to really support my health from a digestive perspective. And for a long time, I couldn't really eat copious amounts of cooling foods, even in the middle of summer. I would see it change my digestion into, it just seemed a little bit more sluggish. It just, a little bit more bloating. And that was just for me in particular. Everyone looks a little bit different. But after really supporting digestion, help warming up through different kinds of digestive bitters, foods, chewing my food really well, working and supporting on my nervous system whenever I eat. Now I can eat raw foods again. I can eat, a big raw salad and not have it impact my digestion. And so I guess the symptoms to look out for if you know that you're overdoing it on the cooling foods is, are you experiencing digestive distress, whether that's bloating, sluggish digestion, a change in bowel movements, particularly if you tend to be a little bit more constipated or the bowel movements are a little bit more sticky in particular. Those are things to look out for, that you may need some more heat in the mixture. So you can do that simply with a cup of ginger tea. You don't have to go above and beyond to incorporate all of these warming foods into your diet every single day, especially because it's so hot outside.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, that's a wonderful question. So for the recipes, I do have a cookbook, and I would love to share it with the attendants. And so I have a link to where I will share it with you, to where if they just put in their information, I will send them the cookbook. It has 11 different recipes that include the herbs that we talked about and the foods.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So helpful.
Thank you. Well, I really enjoyed this. Do you have any other questions for me?
Let me see. I was jotting some things down throughout. I think I kind of asked them all throughout. Yeah. I guess any major foods to avoid.
In the summer, just copious amounts of ice cream.
Okay.
Anything icy. Even like your smoothies, even if they are whole food based, if you're just pulling those berries, blueberries right out of the freezer, let them warm up for a little bit before you blend them. And just to where the chill comes off a little bit, but you can actually neutralize some of that iciness, especially like in a smoothie per se, to where if you're adding in your frozen berries and different vegetables in there, adding in a pinch of ground ginger, you can help kind of balance it, swing it back the other way, to where it's not so cooling on digestion. But it's something, so just for example, with something like a smoothie, part of our digestion is chewing. And so if we're just drinking our food, we're missing that one single mechanical component to digestion of chewing. Everything else is going to be chemical. So, adding in a sprinkle of shredded coconut, for example, to where your smoothie has a little bit of a chew to it, can actually help support digestion as well, especially if you are prone towards bloating or digestive symptoms or distress.
Thanks. And then on the note of chewing, actually, I think I heard somewhere once, but never confirmed this, optimal like number of chews before you swallow your food. Do you know what it is?
I think they say, I don't know. I've heard different numbers.
The number I heard was 40, and that's hard.
It's hard. I think as low as 25 is something that I've heard.
Wow.
But just as simple, if you don't want to sit there and have to count everything out, just put your fork down in between bites. You'll automatically increase your chews by about 10 to 15, depending on the person.
That makes sense. Definitely something I'm working on.
Yeah. No, me too. Oh, it's easy to forget to chew. Our moms are right. Chew your food. Slow down.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you. I had a wonderful time. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate it.